Greetings and good evening to you all today. In this year of 2020, we have all had to make adjustments to our lives. And when you're planning a year in advance for a special event like your anniversary, it's kind of disconcerting and discouraging to know that all the things you spent so many hours developing are not going to happen the way you expected. So I'm so pleased that you persevered, that you found a way to make it happen, that this special event is going to be special. It will be an annal in your records. This is what happened during COVID. And we all, I think, are pleased that we are still here and that we're well and that we can do the things that we know need to be done. So thank you for inviting me to participate with you by way of Zoom. I've had to learn, as all of us have, but this is a very special time for everyone. When I reflect back on this year, knowing the challenges that we face daily, I also reflect back to our ancestors. What did they have to face in their day-to-day lives? Was it anything like what we are facing? And when I think about it to their era, I say no to myself, because they did not have what we have in today's life. They didn't have the opportunities and the privilege and the money to do the things that we are doing. But yet, they achieved so much. Your church is founded on the lives, the aspirations, the energy, the faith that your members, founders, and trustees had. Your church, founded in 1820, according to your history, most of your members were enslaved. Their authority only came from people who oversaw their labor. That in itself is discouraging, but they didn't let that stop them. They moved ahead. They organized. They supported each other. They found people outside their race to help them. And they took advantage of that. They were grateful. They just knew there was a better world, and they had to be part of making that world happen. I know from my history in working with African Cemetery Number 2 that you have founders and trustees in our cemetery. What I have learned in reading through deeds and records is that our African American churches in this city, probably all across the United States, in order to build their congregations, to erect structures, most of the pre-Blacks who were members were signers of your deeds. They owned property. And as we all know, when you own property, you can use the collateral in your property to gain the things that you need. These free Blacks did this. They show up in your deeds. The names of the three that I know are in our cemetery are Charles Buckner, Moses Spencer, and Reverend James Turner. Charles Buckner purchased his freedom. He was a coopersmith, so he had a viable business skill that he used to sustain himself and family, but also to help sustain a church that he dearly loved. When he died, he left a will. He left provisions in his will for a benefit to this church. Moses Spencer was also a free Black who had purchased his freedom, and he and Charles Buckner had formed a partnership believe it or not, they had a used furniture store on North Broadway. All of this is in deed records. And I was just totally shocked when I first found it. But they had formed this partnership to provide furniture, used furniture. And I've seen Mr. Moses Spencer's name at auctions where he has purchased things from estates. So it wasn't a made up story. He really was a partner in the wholesale, well, not wholesale, but the furniture store. When he died in 1877, he also left a benefit to your church. Reverend James Turner, and you did have two Reverend James Turners. This is the first James Turner. Also had purchased his freedom in 1841, and he too started saving money, buying property. He was a painter, so he was constantly employed with all the new building going on in Lexington. He was in great demand, and from his obituary, I learned that he was highly respected. It was quite unusual to find obituaries for any African American during the 1890s. But he had three. I was just shocked. But it also let me know that the community as a whole respected him. As I started reading more about Reverend Turner, he was, I guess, what we would call him today is a mover and shaker. He was one of the members of the Colored Education Society that was a trustee to buy property and build the second African American school in Lexington. He was one of those people that signed on as a trustee. He was a treasurer, the first treasurer of the Colored Fair, which was organized in 1869, ran until 1942. Of course, Reverend Turner had died by then, but he was a long-standing treasurer of that early organization that was so successful. He was also part of the educational committee that formed the Kentucky Negro Education Association that lobbied for the formation of what we now know as Kentucky State University. His name is all over the movements to bring African Americans to the forefront in education and politics. When I read his obituary, they also said he had been a chaplain at the county jail during the time period. So he was a very influential person. These three men, they weren't the only three, but they're the ones that I know more about. In 1850, they purchased property for St. Paul to expand the smaller church that you started in. One of the descriptions of the property indicated that it was adjacent to a stray pen. Now, stray pen in earlier times was an area that animals who walked through the street, that Lexington was very rural. So many of their animals escaped. They wandered through the hogs, the cattle, the goats, wandered through the streets. So if you found a stray animal, you took them over to the stray pen, and then you need to go and find if your animal is in that stray pen. This was 1850. Most of us know that the Fugitive Slave Law, national law, was enacted in 1850. We know that escaped slaves did whatever they could to avoid recapture. One of them was to walk through the water if you're following a creek. Another is to camouflage yourself. And the third is to cover your scent. When you walk through an animal pen, your scent is covered. So those things, having them bought property next to the stray pen, said to me, they purposely did this We know your history of having a room where escaped slaves could hide. It's logical that they would have come through the Strode pen, gone back out through the Strode pen, so their hiding place would never have been discovered. These men also knew that. They didn't write it down, but looking at circumstances and knowing our history says that it was purposeful. And I'm thinking, they're free. Why would they help enslaved people? But they had been enslaved. We don't know what their lives were like prior to their freedom, but the evidence is in what they did with their freedom. And I celebrate them, and I look at their monuments every time I go to the cemetery. And I know their stories are much deeper than we know currently. And I hope there will be some younger person who'll come along and try to unravel more of their history and do some in-depth study of our free Black population, because they were of such help to African Americans after emancipation. They joined them. They could have just said, okay, you guys are on your own, but they did not. They joined them. They were part of every organization. The Colored People's Convention that was first called in Lexington to lobby for the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Those men who were still living, Reverend Turner among them, their names are on these records. They did not have to do it, but they did. So give a shout out, remind yourself of these men, call out their names, make them a part of your everyday congregational worship. We do this in the cemetery for our veterans, military veterans. We do it in the cemetery for other men, categories of men and women. We call their names because you don't forget. So I challenge you, yes, continue with your programming for this year, or, for your future years, but also reach back and say thank you to those men and women, because there were some women very powerful in your church, men and women who helped you grow to this point. Call their names. Thank you for your time and have a blessed evening.